the whole focus of this lightning talk is about growing a group, and that's why we've missed out on a lot of other interesting tips. Now, I came up with this incredibly catchy title because I couldn't actually express what I was trying to say in less words. So what we basically did is have a look at how big we were with the Amsterdam group, which is now called Docker Randstad, compared that to the population of Amsterdam, and then compare that to all the other cities that were doing meetups, when we came out as 7th on Earth, which felt pretty good. What we then did is write this blog post, which you can see the URL up there at the top, and this got picked up by quite a few people, and we made lots and lots of hits, and meetup.com posted it as one of their best practice blog posts on their own blog, which got us a total of about 7 hits, I think, which was surprising. So a little bit about me. I recently uninstalled Facebook entirely, and then I realized that that took all the photos of me from all time with it. So this is a picture of me 5 years ago. I started Docker Randstad at the end of 2013 with Pini Resnick and Jamie Dobson from Container Solutions. Was involved with DockerCon EU in 2014. The reason why I was involved in Docker in the first place is because for a very long time I was a continuous delivery consultant. But recently I'm in technical marketing, and I'm now the CEO at implicit-explicit. I promise that'll be the last slide that has bullet points on it, which leads us nicely to the shameless plug. So what implicit-explicit does is marketing for B2B tech companies. You can see there some of our current clients. So if you work at one of those or a company like that and need help, please do get in touch. Right, now to the point. So you want to grow your Docker meetup, and I'm assuming here that you're not like Docker Paris or Docker London or Docker San Francisco, that are absolutely huge, and that you're trying to build something up sort of from the ground. And what I'm going to do is tell you some of the tips that we came up with whilst growing Docker Randstad from like a bunch of guys in my living room to what it is now, which is 1,500 and something members. One of the things that happens a lot at Docker Randstad, and I don't know if that's something that other meetup organizers experience, is that often we'll put a meetup online without any speakers and any venue, and we'll have 70 people within a day. So something we're doing is going well, and this is hopefully going to share some of those learning points with you. I split it into the same format as the blog, which is, let's have a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 main sections, and at the end I put a lot of extra tips in that didn't really fit anywhere. So let's get started with that. First thing we found, we did the first meetup, like I said, in my living room. That was just an introduction to Docker that was actually done by one of the co-organizers, Pini Resnick. And it was very popular, but after that, quite quickly, things dropped off. So the first thing we noticed is the bigger the name, the bigger the attendance. Now, this is pretty obvious, but what's not obvious is how to get those big names. So some of the things that we tried straight away were stealing things from conferences, or stealing speakers from conferences. So there were, we're lucky enough in Amsterdam to have a lot of big conferences here, and whenever big names were coming through, we would try and poach them and deliberately put a meetup sort of the day before or the day after, and we'll come back to that timing question later. The problem at first is that there just weren't very many big Docker speakers. So what we also did is tried out some other stuff. So we did an anti-Docker evening, where we got people. What we noticed at the time is that a lot of people who would describe themselves as operations hated Docker. So we thought, well, that's fun. So we'll get them to come along and tell us why it's also crap. And that will generate some healthy discussion, which it did. And that one was actually very popular. That was in January of last year. Another thing was to get big names over from either Amsterdam or from London and neighboring cities who sort of had written books in other areas but would touch on subjects that were important in Docker. So, for example, people that had written books about software testing or about microservices, service discovery, orchestration, things like this. Because the crowd will come to see the name and will learn something about how you could use Docker to implement this similar techniques during the meetup. Docker actually was our main source of big speakers in the beginning, so thanks for that. We got Jerome over, and I can't remember who else, but all of those meetups were entirely sold out, and people were queued down the street. And this led to a lot of initial growth. And I'll show you at the end a graph of our growth over time and try and point out some of the key points. Next, and this is the most important one for me for any meetup, is that I go to too many meetups, well, in general, but I go to too many meetups that are like everyone files in, no one's really in charge. It feels a bit like school, or maybe you went to a nicer school than I did, but it feels a bit like school. So I just personally can't deal with that, so I didn't want to do it. So some of the things we do is, if there are any vendors there, or any people from any vendors, we allow them to bring t-shirts and swag, and we throw that around in the crowd. I also ask at the beginning of every meetup for everyone to put their hands up if they've been there before, and for all the people who've not been there before to put their hands up. And then I ask people that if they're sat next to someone who's never been there before to shake their hand, and extra points for hugs. Now, it sounds stupid, but it's a really nice way to just break the tension in the room when people come in, because a lot of people are coming into a strange environment. They're maybe not comfortable around strangers, and if they're there for the first time, then they may even be less comfortable still. So doing something like that just really helps to break the ice, and it sets the scene for the evening, which is we're here to learn about Docker, but we're also here to drink beers and eat pizza and have fun. And that's the most important thing. One of the things we always do with Docker Randstad is what we call an after party, which is normally, if we have 100 people, then that ends up being about 15 people in a pub somewhere nearby. Now, that's not very sustainable if you have to be up the next day, but it does help to keep this sort of cohesion between people, and you start noticing similar faces there all the time, but also new people coming. That's a great way to just sort of chat, and we will get to the point of engagement later, which I think is very important here. The next thing we cover is keeping things ad hoc. So what I see a lot of other meetups doing is just planning like a January, February, March, and April, June, July, blah, blah, blah sort of meetup, which is fine, I think, and even we're doing that now, but now we're much, much bigger. And if you're in a sort of bootstrapping mode, you need to make it look a bit more exciting than like a bus timetable. So what we did at first was just plan a meeting whenever we had anything interesting to talk about, or whenever a speaker was in town. So, for example, we had Steve Freeman in town. We found out on Wednesday, so we planned a meetup on Thursday evening when he was still there. He came to talk. It was very popular, and we did this a lot in the beginning. It took us a while to settle into a regular schedule, but I'm glad we didn't, because I think it makes it much more exciting for the crowd. If something's just happening tomorrow and you have to be there or miss out, then they're much more likely to show up. And it also sort of gives the impression that, that it's really happening, that it's sort of dynamic, and that it's not just this sort of regular thing where a bunch of people get together and talk about boring crap. Have I missed anything there? No. Okay, next was about sharing, and Victor's touched on this during his introductory slides. One of the big ways we grew the group was by doing joint meetups. So I already mentioned one of the examples. We did a joint meetup with the DevOps group here in Amsterdam and made it into an anti-Docker event. Now that led to a lot of, should we say, heated discussions, but it was definitely not boring. We also did one with Microservices Amsterdam, which is a pretty obvious fit. There are some technical challenges here. Like typically, you have to actually keep 2 meetups, and then there can be problems if you have a particularly strict venue that needs a list of everyone. Then you have to sort of combine the lists and remove all the duplicates and all this kind of crap. But it's definitely worth it, because we saw big boosts in numbers during our shared meetups. We haven't done one for a while, but I think that's something we'll definitely be doing again. Last of the sort of first 5 main points is about communication. So we regularly email with the group. Now, as the group grows, probably, well, the guys that already have big groups will know this, and those that are still growing their groups may not be seeing this yet, but as you start to get like 700, 800, 900 and above members, you'll start getting trolled from all angles by people who are trying to sell shit to you, basically. And the emails will sound a little bit like, hey, I've noticed you run blah, Docker blah. Can you sell our thing? Now, we don't say no to all of these things, because some of them are actually useful. So, for example, we had a company that was giving 100% off online AWS trainings. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. We'll do that. But some of them are clearly just trying to sell, and that would not be good for the community. So we always try to keep an eye on, are we spamming, or are we actually helping them out? One of the other things we do is we're more than happy to communicate other people's events to our members. So for example, Google has an office here and they do some interesting events. Now Google tend to be sort of insular in the way that they do these things, which is, I think, not a very good idea, but fine, that's the way they do it. So we are happy to communicate Google's events as long as they don't clash with ours, or like DockerCon or anything like that. And also other meetup events. I mean, if we've done a joint meetup with, for example, Organisers Amsterdam, and they have a really fascinating speaker coming up soon, we'll tell our members about that. And by doing that, you get this sort of reciprocal love from the other meetup groups, which again helps in the future when you've got a big speaker coming. You really want to make sure that the room is full. So that basically covers what we said in the blog post originally, which you can read at the URL at the beginning, and I'll stick the link into the chat a little bit later. There were some extra tips that I thought of while I was going through this, so I want to go through those now. The first one's a little bit evil. So if you want to grow your meetup group, don't allow +1s, because then everyone who wants to come will have to join the group. Now, that'll probably get mixed reactions, but I think if you're coming to a free event anyway, you can sign into meetup.com. You can do it with LinkedIn, Facebook. It's basically too easy to not do. What I also noticed is, and I'll come back to this at the end, is when you disallow guests, you get less attendee fall-off, because people are named and can be shamed. And we actually have a tradition of shaming people on the meetup events, but only if we know them. We don't do that to new guys. If they RSVP yes, then don't turn up. It's all about engagement and not size. And at the end, I'm going to show you one of the open source tools that we've built which will give you our GitHub account. Now we've got a tool that's working at the moment, which shows how often members come to meetups, so you can get an idea of your engagement instead of size. Because we may be 1,500 members, but if it's the same 100 that come every time, then we'd like to know that, and we'd like to do something about it. So I'll share that link at the end. What's next? Talk length. What I see is a lot of other meetups with very rigid talk lengths, and Victor mentioned this earlier, give people a lightning talk, give them whatever they want. What I say is literally give them whatever they want. So if they want to talk for 45 minutes, which apparently is a normal talk length, then give them that. If they want to do 20, fine, 30, fine. An hour, if they can really, really justify it, and they're a good speaker and it's going to be fun, then let them do that as well. The sort of Ignite or lightning talks is something we do to enable like new speakers. We get a lot of people saying, I'd like to talk, but I'm a bit nervous. So we give them like shorter spots so they don't have to be in pain for quite so long, and they can build up their public speaking skills. Newbies is a big one. So I said at the beginning that when people are walking into a new meetup, it's not just about the content, and it's about the fact that, like anybody, when you walk into a new room, depending on your personality type, you have various sorts of reactions to that, which could be anything from I love being around new people to I'm shit scared and please somebody hold my hand. And all of those are fine. What we try to do is search out the newbies. Now, we don't do this in a programmatic way. I just have a quick look through the list ahead of time. Make a little list and then try and find most of them and shake their hands and introduce them to someone else that I know. Now, this takes actually quite a lot of time, especially with our meetups being much bigger now, but I still try to do a few. So we're not getting them all, but it's better than nothing. And I think if you've got a smaller meetup group, then this is something that you can do with everybody, and it'll really help to increase engagement and keep people coming back, because they'll regard it as a pleasing social experience as opposed to a sort of alienating, scary one. I put this slide in quickly because Victor mentioned reaching out to the community for feedback. Typeform is an excellent product which you can use for free to send out really pretty looking questionnaires. We haven't actually done this with Docker Randstad, but we've done it with some of the other meetup groups that we run, and it works very well. So if you've got something you want to ask to your community, I would recommend Typeform. The free version gets you more than enough, I think. This is the last bit. So this is the open source tooling that we've been building. You can check out the GitHub at the bottom. It's a Python app, but it comes with a Vagrant box, so you can go and run it yourself fairly easily. basically what you can see here is a Venn diagram of the overlap of members between different meetup groups and also the meetup group growth over time. So what you quite pleasingly see is that Docker Randstad started last and is now highest. This is a tool that we're working on. It's totally free and it will always be totally free. And if you think you've got a use for this or a different use case, then please go and use it and tell us and we'll probably implement it, because we've got about 1,000 new feature ideas and we're just working through them one at a time. And if someone could help us with prioritizing, that would be wonderful. Next to this, like I said earlier, we're working on a tool which will also be on the same GitHub repository, on the same GitHub account, which will allow you to see your engagement by looking at how often different members come. The Meetup API at the moment is still ridiculously open, so you can see pretty much everything about everybody. Now that's nice for the NSA, but also for us, because it means we can actually see which members are engaging, and then we can, which something we haven't done yet, but what we will do is then see if we can come up with ways of increasing engagement and then measuring that over time. And that's something I can maybe share in the future. I wasn't even looking at the clock, so I don't know if I was over time or not. That's my email address. If you've got any questions, you can also stick them in the chat bar at the side. That's our meetup, if you want to go and look at sort of how often we do events and what we've done in the past and that sort of thing. And for anyone who came to see this talk at DockerCon EU, my great apologies, but I was ill, so I couldn't make it, so you have to get it online now. And I think that's it from me.